Welcome to Career Candour, where we go beyond the LinkedIn headlines and dig deep into the stories, decisions, and mindset shifts that shape remarkable careers. Today's guest is someone who truly embodies innovation, resilience, and global impact. Sonita Lontoh is an independent board director at Sunrun and Trueblue, a Silicon Valley venture advisor, and a former Fortune 100 executive whose career spans clean tech, AI, 3D printing, and digital transformation. She's been honored by the White House, inducted into both the Asian American Hall of Fame and the US Women in Manufacturing Hall of Fame, and is a passionate advocate for women in technology and board leadership. In this episode, we talk about everything from how she pivoted between startups and global corporates to what really goes on in the boardroom, to how she's helping shape the future of innovation and governance in an AI-driven world. Get ready for an honest, thoughtful, and deeply inspiring conversation with Sunita Lontoh. Sunita, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me here today, Lee.
Thank you so much for joining. I'm super excited today. Profile, when I came across it, when we connected on LinkedIn, I just thought it was so unique, so intriguing, and I was delighted when you reached out and said, "Hey, would you like to record a podcast?" So you did the hard work for me. Look, I just want to kick things off, Sunita, with your story. How would you describe your career journey in your own words?
Yeah, great question. So, good morning for everyone in Indonesia and in Asia, and good evening to those in the United States. Again, thank you for having me here. I guess I would describe my career journey, Lee, as eclectic. When I look back at my journey, probably there were key three chapters that I think are quite pivotal to like how I started and kind of where I am today. Basically the early years, the corporate years, and today what I call the portfolio years. So let's start with the early years. So I'm originally from Jakarta, Indonesia, born and raised there, a city that you know very well. When I was growing up there, as you know, I was, I guess, somewhat what you would call a triple minority in Indonesia because I'm a female. I'm a mix of Indonesian and Chinese heritage, and also I'm Catholic. And as you know, Indonesia is, I think, about 85% Muslim. I had a wonderful childhood growing up in Indonesia because it's a country that's, I think, is diverse, very moderate, and also very welcoming with to people with different backgrounds. And then I came to the United States when I was a teenager to really go to college, but then I came by myself. I had to learn a new language and a new culture. So I share this kind of early years with you because I think looking back, I had always been somewhat of a minority, right? Be it like growing up in Indonesia or in the United States as an international student at the time. But the lesson that I learned from those early years was that I never look at my minority status as a disadvantage. And I actually look at it as something of an advantage because in my case, I believe that those early years have actually enabled me to develop a more diverse and global perspective. Then let's move on to my corporate years. So, not many people know this, but I actually started my career as an entrepreneur. Right after I graduated college, I had the opportunity to start my own online game company with two of my classmates from Berkeley. Granted, I think we were a little bit early, but we were able to do it for a couple years and eventually sold it actually to a larger competitor. And after that, I had a brief stint going back to graduate school. And then I started my career in the corporate world. And in the past, I would say 25 years or so, I've really had the honor and privilege to kind of like have a career at the intersection of new technology. There's always something new, like technology, be it smart grid, IoT, 3D printing. And then with that new technology, usually there's a need to kind of launch a new business, be it with like a traditional business model or with a new business model. And I have done this in various companies, both at smaller, more entrepreneurial, venture backed Silicon Valley technology companies, but also with large global Fortune 100, but always focusing on starting new businesses for them. So my last operating role was with Hewlett Packard with HP, but I was there to help HP launch their new 3D printing and digital manufacturing business. And before that, I was with Siemens, another kind of old, large German conglomerate, but based in the United States. But when I was with Siemens, I helped them launch their new digital energy business. And prior to that, I was with a few Silicon Valley venture-backed startups, focusing primarily on industrial IoT. And I started my corporate career with a company called Pacific Gas and Electric Company, who is one of the largest energy companies in the United States. But again, I was focusing more on their kind of new renewable and smart energy initiatives. And then about 2 years ago, I transitioned full time into what people here call portfolio life. And basically, portfolio life just means, hey, you're no longer an executive. You don't have like a 9 to 5, but it doesn't mean like you're just sitting at home and eating bonbons all day. Usually, people in portfolio life has, several things that they do. And in my portfolio life today, I serve on 2 public company boards, one university board, and also as a advisor to a venture capital firm. So I would say my career journey had been kind of eclectic, if that's kind of like how I would describe it.
What was it that inspired your early interest in tech, innovation, and entrepreneurship?
Yeah, I think that's a very good question. I think in the very beginning, it wasn't always clear kind of like what industry or functional area I wanted to get into. But I felt like it was really in graduate school. So, when I graduated college, right, I started the company and then sold it. And then I went back to graduate school. So I went to MIT to get my master's in engineering, and I went to Northwestern Kellogg to get my MBA. I think it was in graduate school, like how people in graduate school always kind of like wondering what they should do next, right? And I think for a lot of MBAs, kind of like the traditional is to go into consulting or banking if you don't know what to do. But I think in graduate school, I kind of like started just thinking a little bit deeper with regards to what I wanted to do. Maybe not as specific as what company or what functional area, but I think I had 2 guiding principles in graduate school. The first is like I started realizing, Lee, that I really like the intersection of new technology, innovation, the creation of new business models, and even a little bit of policy. And then the second guiding principle was I realized I kind of wanted to work in an industry where there is something that I call the additionality factor. And what that means is like, hey, at the end of the day, every business has to make money, have to grow, right? Have to deliver for shareholders. But there are certain industries, like energy or healthcare, that there is a little bit of that additionality factor, kind of like there is a little bit more of a purpose, like a higher calling. And so I think that's really how I, over the years had just really used these 2 guiding principles to help me kind of navigate if there is some opportunities coming my way, of if I, come across, potential opportunities. I really evaluate those opportunities based on these 2 guiding principles.
And you come across as quite a global citizen with your story. You've lived and worked around the world. How has that shaped the way that you lead and make decisions?
Yeah, great question. So just clarification. So professionally, I've always been based in the United States. However, of course, throughout the years, I've led teams around the world and also have had customers and partners and locations right around the world. So I would travel, to Europe, to Asia, to visit my teams, visit my customers, visit my partners. But in terms of like the base has always been in the United States. I guess like this kind of global experience shaped how I think about business or approaching business in a few ways. The first, I think the experiences that I've had just really taught me the importance of localization when you are about to launch a new business in a new country. And you may think that, oh, Sonita, that is so basic. But Lee, you would be surprised under certain pressure. Sometimes you want to go fast. You kind of like forget some of these things, you know what I mean? And I think from my experience, even under pressure, sometimes there is so much pressure to like go to a new country fast. A lot of companies, when they launch, they don't do too much localization because they want to go fast. And then sometimes they also kind of like don't want to spend the time yet to like get someone locally. So they'll get someone that can speak that language, but from another country to travel to that country. And I have learned over the years that that is the wrong way to do it. Like you have to be a little bit more patient. You have to do in-market research. You have to localize your products and pricing for the local country. And the best is to get someone locally from that country who have like the established network and understanding of the local cultural language, economic and political situation to be the leader for that new business in that particular country. And then the second aspect that I learned is just the importance of understanding the culture and expectations of employees in different countries. So, for example, in Europe, especially continental Europe, I have to say, people don't, people tend not to work as much as those in the United States. In France, I think there's even a law that says people are not supposed to work more than 35 hours a week. And that is very different from like, kind of the expectations in the United States, right? And I think people in different countries kind of like look at work-life balance differently. And as a leader, you have to understand this and to respect it. But at the same time, also you have to make sure that your teams in all these different countries can be productive and effective, right? And then the last thing I think is the importance of just understanding the different rules and regulations. In the United States, as you may or may not know, most work arrangements are basically what we call at-will employment, which means that the employer and the employee can terminate the relationship at any time, with cause or without cause. But usually, people give 2-week notice. But in many European countries, I don't think that is the case because I think the labor law there are much more stringent. If you are about to part with someone, I think you have to first justify it to the workers' councils. You have to kind of put the person in a garden leave for at least 6 months with pay. And you have to help the person find the next job and preferably in your own company first. And so I guess like these are just the things that if you have teams in different countries, you have to understand all these different things that will make kind of like the team effective and also productive.
Mm. If you were to boil down all that experience, Sunita, into perhaps one major moment or life decision that really shifted the trajectory of your career, I mean, what would that moment or decision be?
Yeah, wow. That is a very interesting question. I think in my case, Lee, I don't think there's like a specific moment or decision that dramatically shifted my career trajectory. But I think in aggregate, there are probably a few things, that have have really helped me in my career. The first, I think I have always been open to opportunities, even when they don't necessarily look like the ideal ones at the time. I remember early in my career, I had an offer to go, let's say, work at like an area that I think a lot of people kind of feel, oh, that's not unsexy or glamorous. But I took it because I felt like, hey, in every situation, you can actually learn and grow from the situation. And over time, actually, if you are someone that kind of like the boss knows, will go do the hard things, will actually go do the things that maybe the others don't want to, then you start building a reputation as someone who is agile, who can do many different things. And I think that is very valuable for me in my career. And then the other thing I think that inadvertently I did without realizing it at the time, because in my career, I had always been involved with something new, right? So let's say smart energy or smart grid or like IoT or 3D printing. So in a lot of my roles, I have to kind of go out there in the industry and explain what it is, why is it different from the current paradigm, what are some of the benefits, that customers can get from adopting some of this new technology. But over time, I think if you do that, you will develop a point of view. And in my case, I think I have a pretty strong point of view with regard to some of this new technology. And then over time, people will start looking at you as an expert in whatever it is that you are focusing on. And in my case, I think that had been very helpful for my career because over time, I think after the first position that I had maybe 25 years ago, I never had to look for jobs. Even the board position, I never looked for it. But people would come to me because you are known for something. So I think that is very good for people to develop that point of view, like be an expert in whatever it is that they're focusing on.
When you were working at Pacific Gas and Electric and Siemens, did you already know that you'd eventually land in the boardroom?
Not at all. Not at all. It's funny. I actually think my board journey was a little bit accidental. It actually started in 2017 when I first got the ping for like a potential board position. And it was with one of the recruiting firms. Actually, it was Corn Ferry. And I saw you used to work for Corn Ferry before. So I was at Siemens at the time in their new smart grid division. And someone from Corn Ferry reached out to me and said, hey, like a large publicly listed energy company is interested to talk to you for a potential board position. And I thought, oh, that's kind of interesting. And then at the time, they explained that, hey, this particular company had an opening on their board because someone was retiring and they wanted to use that opening with someone that understand how to use technology such as smart grid, for instance, to help traditional energy companies like this particular energy company to transform the way they do business, which was like a very good fit with what I was doing at the time. However, Lee, as you know, Siemens has many uh, large energy companies as customers. And so this large energy company, unfortunately, was one of Siemens' large customers. And so immediately it created a conflict of interest. And, by nature, you cannot be on a board of someone who's like a large customer of your employer. And so I didn't um, pursue that opportunity. So if you ask, had I always planned it? Not really, but I think it was a matter of like being at the right place at the right time.
And thinking about leadership and leadership at the highest level, that C-suite at that board level, what has surprised you about leadership at that level?
Yeah. I think leadership at that level is really about two things. Because at the end of the day, you're not going to be the person doing it, right? So I think the first is about the ability to set a compelling vision, and I think a lot of people in Silicon Valley kind of like feels the vision has to be something that is a completely new paradigm, but I don't believe that's necessary. I think you have to have the ability to set a compelling vision, be it like a new paradigm or, the current paradigm, that's fine. But with that vision, you have to be able to inspire others and also to marshal the resources necessary for the others to help you achieve that vision. So that's one. And then I think at the board level, it's really about the ability to be collaborative but effective. And why I say that? Because a lot of boards says they're collegial, right? Every board would say, "Oh, we're very collegial." But sometimes when you're too collegial, it actually might not be good because I think in the boardroom, yes, you have to respect each other, but I think from time to time you also have you have to have the courage to kind of challenge each other, right? Challenge management from time to time because you're there not for management. Your fiduciary is to shareholders, right? So I think, at the board level, you have to be able to be collaborative but effective. So you respect each other, you are collegial. However, you also have the courage to challenge each other when it's necessary so that you can have a healthy debates and discussion, which eventually will lead to a much more optimal decision.
I'm feeling courage is a bit of a theme here. So courage in the sense of you were willing to put your hand up when companies asked, and then also the ability to have, I wouldn't say confrontational conversations, but to have conversations that that might be uncomfortable as well. I'd like to dig into that a little bit and ask you a question, which is, was there a moment where you doubted yourself? And if so, how did you work through it?
Oh, I mean, many times, right? Like there are too many instances, I think, throughout my career that, I think it's would be hard for me to mention one by one. But usually, I think when I doubt myself, I try to get over it by doing a few things. The first, I just like to be very preparedly. Like I think for someone on the board, I'm actually very detailed oriented. I do my homework. I talk to employees, of course, with management blessings, customers. I listen to competitors' earnings calls. I do a lot of things that I think maybe some board members don't do. So I do a lot of preparation beforehand just to make myself, feel comfortable about my point of view. And then the second, I think over time I've learned it's okay to fail. I think a lot of people when they doubt themselves, then they don't do it, right? Because they are afraid of the failures. But I actually think you should do it because actually, if you fail, it's a good thing. It's not about the failure that is the important thing. Of course, many people will fail, but I think it's about the ability to quickly learn from the failure, to reflect and to pivot. And over time, if you have failed so many times, you will get used to it, and it will not be such a big deal anymore. And then that will be one of your superpower compared to the people who will never do anything because they're afraid of failures.
Yeah, I mean, looking back, what was your biggest professional risk and what came out of it?
Wow. I would say my biggest professional risk was probably the HP position, to be very honest with you. And um, the reason for that, because I think before HP called me, um, even though I was helping companies start new businesses, it had always been kind of more um, along the lines of that company's core competency. And what I meant by that is, even when I was with Siemens, granted Siemens wanted to get into a new business, like a new arena, which is digital energy, right? Because like many conglomerates, like Siemens started in electrification, and from electrification, they moved up the value chain to automation, but eventually everyone wanted to get to digitalization. However, like the way Siemens kind of approached the new uh, industry was still within their domain expertise. So it was digital energy, digital factory, and these are areas where Siemens had a lot of expertise, but they were focusing on digitalization. Totally makes sense. But when HP called me, let me tell you, I felt like the kind of things that they wanted to do was really out of the box, extremely out of the box, things that are like a completely new paradigm for the company. And it was a big risk because I think, you can fail. Because if you want to move up the value chain, but not within your core competency or your domain expertise, I think the chance of failure is much higher. So I think the HP position to me was actually the professional position that maybe was the highest risk for me because it was also the highest risk for the company, but also was the one that taught me the most because, the experiences that I had there really taught me to be bold in like going after new businesses, going after new business models that may not be familiar for the core business, and just really be comfortable in incubating new businesses, launching new businesses fast, learn from it. And it was it was both very challenging, but also very um, um, rewarding.
So I'd like to move on now and look at leadership and values. A lot of listeners to the podcast and subscribers to the newsletter, many of them are in leadership positions. Many who are not aspire to be so one day. So I'd like to ask you about your leadership style today. Could you describe your leadership style and how did you develop it?
Yeah, great question, Lee. I think my leadership styles probably have evolved over time. But in general, there are a few general leadership principles that I, let's just say, subscribe to over the years. The first one, I think leaders have to be customer focused. And I say this because in a lot of my careers, I have been working with brilliant engineers who usually invent something new. And a lot of engineers, I think, have a tendency to focus on the technology, which, there's nothing wrong with that. They should. But I think as a leader, especially in business, you have to be customer focused. You have to be the one that tells the engineers that why are we doing it this way? What are actually the customer pain points that we are trying to achieve? And and in addition to that, I think the leaders have to help their teams to be able to translate kind of the brilliance that the engineers created into benefits, something that the customers actually understand. So I think customer centricity is very important. And then the second, I think leaders have to act like owners. And actually, I think in the United States, the compensation structure is actually very conducive for this as well, because the higher up, you move in the company, actually a much larger percentage of your compensation comes in the form of stock options or stock grants, right? And so you are an owner, and so you will be incentivized to kind of think long term, to also want to increase shareholders value. And of course there are many ways you can measure how you're increasing shareholders value, but one easy way is increasing the stock of the company. And then the third principle is really, I think, about developing other leaders. I think as you kind of, like move up the leadership ladder, I mean, it's not about, hey, how many followers do I have? How big is my department? I have a department of 10,000 people. The next guy has a department of like 20,000 people. I don't think it's about that, but I think it's about developing the people around you so they can be leaders. And actually, on this particular one, I remember I read a book by John Maxwell maybe about 10 years ago. So he's like kind of one of those leadership guru there. But he just said, there are 5 levels of leadership. The lowest level of leadership is positional, which is the easiest because, hey, you're a leader because you're the manager. But as you kind of move up, the 5 levels, unfortunately I forgot what are each of the 5 levels, but at the very top, it's like about how many other leaders are you actually developing. And I think that really resonated with me. And today in my board role, I think you do that a lot because you do have to um, guide, right? Advise management. So you are not their boss, but you have to be able to kind of help them, so that they can be successful, so that the company can be successful.
Yeah, I'm a big believer in values-based leadership, and I guess it sounds easier than it is sometimes because management leadership isn't always smooth sailing.
Yes.
Thinking thinking back to your own experiences, are there any moments where your values were tested as a leader?
Sure. You know what? Actually, very early in my career, when I was having, this startup that I started with 2 of my classmates, as with many startups, right? Like founding, um, the kind of like funding rounds were very important. And there's a time that I think we knew we really needed the next round in order to kind of survive. And one of my business partners was approached by a company. I'm not going to mention the name, but that supposedly was going to invest in us. And then over time, I kind of learned, I and the other business partner, so there are 3 of us, the business partners, the co-founders, we realized that, oh, actually someone from that company was going to get a kickback if we were going to go with that company. I have to say, it was so early in my career, Lee, I was so young, but still kind of my compass was telling me this is not right, right? I mean, you have to have an integrity. You have to uphold your reputation. This is not the right thing to do. And long story short, I'm glad we didn't do it. I and my other business partner actually, refused to like do this deal at the risk of like the company not getting the funding round. But fortunately, sometime later, we were able to get another funding round from another organization that was, kind of more legitimate and didn't require kind of like this illicit arrangement. And I would say probably that was the first time that, as a young um, business person, I think like there was really a question like, should I kind of like do this or should I not do it? But I think I was very happy that at the end of the day, we decided not to do it.
Having through the Corn Ferry experience yourself, one of the one of the learns that I took from there was around assessment because for assessments and the power of assessments in determining leadership, what we would dig into were a blend of characteristics which are defined often by your lived experience at that moment. So your
Mm-hmm.
characteristics can change based on the role that you're doing. And then the second aspect is something that we would refer to as traits. So traits are intrinsic. So traits don't change. They define what is possible and what your potential is. And I think leadership is a blend of characteristics and traits. But my question there, Sunita, to bring this all together is when you made that step into leadership, are there any traits that you have had to unlearn over time to make that successful transition?
Yeah. So, by the way, Lee, thank you for sharing with me that, kind of explanation. It totally makes sense. And of course, you're a human capital management professional. You know all the kind of frameworks. Um, I have to say, I'm not sure whether this is a trait or a characteristic, but I think for me, transitioning from an operator to like a governance role, like on the board, I think the one thing that I have to unlearn is really the urge to like actively lead and manage, because what had made me successful as an operator, I was leading teams, I was growing the business, doing all these things, right? But on the board, that's no longer your role. You're not there to manage, you're not there to lead, you're not there to grow. Your role there is really to provide governance and oversight. And I think that kind of balance for me was a little bit challenging because I actually joined both my public boards when I was still a sitting executive at HP. So it was very hard because in my day job, I'm an executive, right? I'm actively leading, growing, doing all these things. And then on my board role, you know, I'm not supposed to do that. If anything, management actually doesn't want you to do that. But I was supposed to leverage the experience that I have had as an executive to be able to provide insight and foresight, to help management kind of look around the corner, to ask them the right questions, to make sure that they have thought about all the different scenarios. So I think the leadership, I don't know whether it's a trait or a character based on your previous explanation, that I just have to unlearn, like in my role today that focus on oversight and governance.
One thing I found really impressive, Sunita, about your profile, and I hate stereotypes and I hate molds, but the reality is that they do exist. No, but what I found really impressive was your ability to transcend the mold or stereotype that's often given to women and women in tech, women in leadership. And you've been a big advocate for that, and you've been recognized, rightly so, for your contributions in moving the needle. So what I'd like to ask you, Sunita, regarding this is, if you think about women in tech leadership specifically, what needs to happen at a systems level for women to be recognized and respected in space?
Yes, I think this is a very big question. And actually, Lee, I think I'll answer this based on both the supply side and the demand side, because there's really both sides of the equation. So I think from the supply side, at least this is from what I've seen here in the United States, it has to start from the very beginning, at the very early age, like parents, teachers, the community, they need to encourage, I think, more girls to like study math and science. And they need to tell the girls that, being good in math and science is actually kind of cool. And it's not just for the boys. And I say that because according to the Society of Women Engineers, they did some study a few years ago, and they said like in grade school, only about like 30% of girls thought being good in math and science was cool. But like 70% of boys, said math and science were their favorite subjects in school. And so that's in grade school. And then when you go to universities, um, when you look at the 5 states in the United States that graduated the most women in engineering and STEM, the number was still pretty low. It's only about 20%. And so I think, we do have to address the supply side to make sure that there are enough girls and women that go into engineering and STEM studies. And then the kind of middle thing, I think women also need role models, and it's important, I think, for female to see people who are good, in engineering or STEM, and both at the aspirational level, but also at what I would call the practical level. And I say that because, hey, while it's good, right, to know like, wow, there's like a woman who's like the Nobel Prize winner in chemistry, that's great. Or there is, Lisa Su, the CEO of AMD, that's great. However, if you're like an undergraduate or graduate, your next thing is not going to be a Nobel Prize or the CEO of AMD. Your next thing, probably you're going to try to find a job, or if you're an undergrad, you're going to be in graduate school. And so I think women need role models of like, they need to be able to see there are other females that are doing well, both at the aspirational and also at the practical level. And then the last thing, I think, on the demand side, like from the employer's side, and I have experienced this throughout kind of the companies that I had been a part of. I think they to be effective, like the commitment from the companies have to come from the top, like the board and the C-suite need to set the right tone at the top, that their, let's just say, women's programs should not be like on the fringes. It should actually be a part of the overall kind of company's leadership development program for both men and women. And they also should focus not only on the recruiting, because I think a lot of companies are recruiting, but sometimes they don't focus enough on the retention and the development of these women. And in order, I think, for a lot of these programs to actually be sustainable and effective, you have to have the buy-in all the way from the top to the middle to eventually the front lines.
And what advice would you give women who are already on that journey? Perhaps they feel stuck, So what advice would you give women who are trying to move from mid-career to senior leadership?
Yes, and of course, I'm just speaking from like a corporate environment, right? Because there are also women's founders and all that. But I think from a corporate perspective, women should try to get into line position as soon as possible, have some kind of P&L responsibility. Because, when you look at it, I think sometimes women tend to gravitate towards functional areas for many reasons, because maybe they think it provides more of a work-life balance. Some women have children, they have kind of like responsibilities for that, and they want more of a work-life balance. But I think in order to move up, you have to get in a line position, because the company needs to see that you are actually able to either grow the top line or um, significantly reduce the bottom line and really contribute eventually to the P&L. I think that's one. And then the second, I think women are not as good as this. I think it's about finding good mentors and good sponsors, both men and women, and especially in a corporate environment. I think Most people understand the concept of mentorship, but perhaps not as many people, even though they've heard of it, they haven't been intentional in kind of like finding a good sponsor. And I think in big corporations, it's very important to have a good sponsor because you're not going to be in every room where the decision is made. So you need some advocates for you inside the room that you're not in. Of course, it's not a free thing. I think to find good sponsors, you have to have proven yourself. But I think men kind of do this a little bit more naturally. But I think women do need both good mentors and good sponsors.
You've been recognized quite extensively for your contributions in this area. What is it that keeps you so grounded when many people will perceive you as the role model and a representative?
Oh, Lee, I think it's very important to just stay humble because, as we all know, right? Like, sure, we all work hard, we all prepare, we all do all these things. But I think sometimes, a lot of times actually, I think luck plays a big role as well. And I'm not saying that, oh, don't work hard, just like wait for the luck. I think that's not a good approach either. However, I think a lot of success really comes from the combination of hard work, preparation, and luck. And so I think for me, I've been very grateful. I think I have met good people, I've had good opportunities, I have been at the right place at the right time. Of course, I've also had a lot of failures. So I think just remembering that not everything is because of what you do. Of course, you always have to work hard, you have to be prepared. But I think, a lot of times, you have to be lucky as well.
Speaking of those halls of fame, you've been inducted into multiple. What do those honors mean to you, Sunita?
Yes, this is very interesting. My first Hall of Fame was actually in 2017. It was the Asian American Hall of Fame. And so when the organizer contacted me, I was like, oh, what is this all about? So I checked it out. And at least up to that time, the kind of people that they would induct were, kind of like the famous people, right? Like Bruce Lee. I'm not kidding you. Bruce Lee, Christy Yamaguchi, and all that. And in my class, so I'm a class of 2017, there are four of us. And I learned that one of them was Johnny Damon. You may not be familiar with him, but he was the former Red Sox and Yankees player. He had like two world championship rings and all that. And then the other person was Daniel Day Kim, who's a Hollywood actor. And then there's me, and then another girl from Texas Instrument who had many patents. And so I kind of felt like, wow, like all these famous people. But then, in 2017, I guess they started realizing that, hey, to recognize Asian American contribution, it shouldn't just be the famous people, but because there are many other kind of more normal people, right? Like me, a tech executive, or like this other lady who has so many patents from Texas Instruments that should be recognized. So I guess from this experience, I just felt the obligation to be an advocate for other Asian American women in business and technology to increase, let's just call it the diversity of representation, of Asian American women in the boardroom that are coming more from a normal background like myself. And it's the same story with the Manufacturing Hall of Fame, Lee. I also got inducted into their inaugural class in 2020 when I was still at HP. But the Manufacturing Hall of Fame, didn't have all the celebrities and all that. But I guess all of these kind of recognition really made me even more passionate about helping others that come kind of maybe from a different background, but are also people who have diversity of thoughts to really contribute to their profession.
And how has your identity as an Asian American woman shaped your leadership style, your leadership experience?
Yeah, that is a very good question. I think I think over time I have been more comfortable with who I am. I'm very comfortable in my own skin, and throughout my careers, I have experienced, I don't think it was outward racism or anything like that. I think people didn't mean it, but they just made assumptions based on, I'm a female, I'm Asian. I remember when I was an executive at HP, we would go to Europe with one of my directors who's a white man. And I think people would assume he's the boss, which is fine. And over time, of course, they knew he wasn't the boss. So I have experienced those kind of things, Lee. But I, I am who I am, right? And so, you know, I'm not that loud, and that's okay. And I think, like, as a leader, you don't have to be loud. I think in the beginning, a lot of women felt that they have to be more masculine, especially as they get into more executive positions. They feel like they have to act like the man. But actually, to be honest with you, I think as you grow older, you will become more comfortable in your own skin. Of course, you should be proud of your heritage, but then you should kind of leverage that unique perspective that you have from your life experiences, right? In order to contribute, to your work. The other thing, now that I'm on board, a lot of people are like, well, what do you believe is the unique value proposition that Asian American and Pacific Islanders, AAPI, that's the term that we use here in the United States, bring in the boardroom, and there is almost kind of like an expectation, just because you're AAPI, that you deserve, like, because of your identity, you deserve to get a board seat. And I think that is like the wrong thinking, to be honest with you. I think, like, I don't think anyone should depend on their ethnic identity in order to, like, get a position, right? I think the framework that needs to be used, it is always about your skills. What is your particular skill that that particular board needs at that particular time? And then I think the identity is a bonus. And this is actually one of the conversations, to be honest with you, that has been top of mind in America for the past maybe 5 to 10 years. And I think it is the wrong way to, like, first use ethnic identity as a North Star. I think the North Star should always be expertise, and the ethnic identity is a bonus that kind of provide you a different perspective, perhaps because of your different life experiences.
And speaking of board and journeys, what skills or experience would you say are most valuable in getting into public boards?
Yes. So in general, at least in the United States, the most common background to get on a public board is a sitting or former CEOs or CFOs of public companies. And there's a reason for that, because actually a lot of the work that the board does, yeah, kind of like make it um, make it reasonable that, the people who are sitting or former CEOs or CFOs of public companies are the ones with those experience. However, I think the past maybe 5 to 10 years, when a board position becomes available, so, the board seat is not always available, right? For public companies, it's usually available when someone retires, or in other cases, when a private company is about to go public, then that's when they start recruiting some independent board directors that are not part of the investors class. I think in the past 5 to 10 years, when that board seat becomes available, some companies have taken the approach of really looking at their current composition of the board and kind of seeing where the company is going for the next 5, 10 to 15 years, and take the opportunity to really look at what are the skill sets that are not current or sitting CEOs or CFOs public companies that they want to fill that seat for. And I guess in my case, it so happened that some companies, when that board seat became available, wanted to fill it with someone who understands technology and who can help, the companies kind of navigate new material challenges and opportunities that come, through technology and innovation to help, create long-term value for the company.
I mean, that's quite interesting because often the technology appointments onto boards they're from a newer generation. And you've got the old
Yeah.
guard, and then you've got people coming through. So I'd like to ask you a question about how you define and influence board culture, especially when you're the newest or the youngest in the room.
Right. It is actually tough. And coincidentally, actually, the NACD, that's the National Association of Corporate Directors, we had a kind of committees that focus on board culture in 23. And actually, they invited me to be one of the commissioners. And these are kind of the discussions that we have there. It's like, hey, board needs a healthy board culture in order to be high performing. And in today's environment where boards are faced with, numerous, challenges, right? The words of board today is very different from, let's say, the work of boards like 10, 15 years ago. How can we ensure that we have a healthy board culture? So perhaps we can just take a step back a little bit and define what is a culture. So to me, I think a culture is really a set of shared values, behaviors, and norms, right, that a group of people subscribe to in order to achieve a shared goal. So it's kind of nebulous. It's kind of hard to put your finger on it, but you kind of know it. Like once you're in the room, once you come to the room a couple times, you have a sense of what the culture is like, right? And a healthy board culture at the end of the day, again, is about respect with each other. It's about making decisions in the boardroom instead of having a faction of like boards. There are some boards where like, oh, the three board members with the longest tenure knows everything, and they kind of make the decision in the hallway, and everyone else just rubber stamp. So those are some examples of unhealthy board culture, right? Or some board may have someone who has been there for 25 years. I'm not saying there is anything wrong with being on a board for 25 years. It all depends on how current that person is. But, sometimes when you've been on the board for 25 years, you're no longer independent because you're part of the management, right? And I think um, influencing board culture is about three things. It's about one, defining what is the kind of board culture you want to have. It's funny because a lot of boards say, yeah, we want to have a healthy board culture. But I think very few boards actually take the time to really define, like, what is it, what kind of board culture they want to have. And then second is to have the courage to actually call out some of the red flags. So if you see people are talking about material information outside of the boardroom, you have to have the courage to call it out. And then the last thing, Lee, to be very honest with you, I think even though I think maintaining a healthy board culture is the responsibility of every board member, uh, those kind of board leaders have a very big influence in influencing a healthy board culture. So the culture carriers of the boards are really the chair of the board and the chair of the committees. I think they have a lot of power to really kind of change the dynamics of the conversation, to encourage, some of the newer members or some of the quieter members of the board to chime in, to contribute to the discussions, to perhaps talk to some of the board members who tend to talk a lot, but there's kind of like no substance, in the talking just because people like to talk. I think the leaders of the boards actually have a really big role in setting a healthy board culture. As a new board member, though, of course, you don't have that power, right? But there are many things you can do. I think one of the things that you should do, of course, one, to really do your homework so that you know the company, because it's like a bus. Every board is like a bus. The bus is on a journey. A new board member join. You know what I mean? And I think a lot of the other boards, don't want to like go back to the beginning of the journey just so that the new board member can understand the context. So I think as a new board member, you have to, um, spend the time to really know what is the context, where is the board on their journey, and all that. And then the other thing, really, spend the time to get to know the other board members outside of the boardrooms as individuals. Because once you know someone as an individual, it is so much easier to have, tough conversations in the boardroom.
And how should boards today think differently about their role in innovation and disruption?
Wow, that is a huge question, and I can go all day on this. But maybe I can just share with you a little bit some of the challenges, and then how board can address some of these challenge. Right? I think at least for U.S. boards, when I look around, there are several challenges that boards face when it comes to technology and innovation. The first challenge is really surrounding the composition and the knowledge about technology in the boardroom. When you look at non-tech companies, usually they don't have any board member with like a technology background, and it doesn't mean they need one. But I think given how important technology is today for many companies and how disruptive it could be, I think every board member needs to be what I call technology literate. So here in the United States, the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission, always says every board member has to be financially literate. I would argue today, every board member should also be technology literate. They don't have to be an expert, but hey, they should educate themselves about technology. They should be comfortable, you know what I mean? They should have some kind of level of technology fluency. And then the second challenge, Lee, like in American boardrooms, when you hear about technology, usually it's the chief technology officer coming to the board or the chief security officer, the CISO coming in. They give you all these updates about like the technology um, projects that we're doing, but there is still an insufficient integration between all these technology initiatives or the cybersecurity initiatives that the companies are doing with the business outcomes. So you will hear the CTO talking, the CISO talking, but then like the business leaders would just kind of like ignore it, right? And I think as a board member, there is a big opportunity here for boards to really encourage their management to view technology and innovation as truly part of the overall company's business strategy that is completely tied to business outcomes. So don't just have the CTO talking about, the projects, the deadlines, the budgets, but ask, let's say, the business unit presidents, how are some of these technology initiatives affecting your business? Is it helping you to win new customers? Is it helping you to reduce costs? Ask the chief marketing officer. Is it helping you to retain customers? I think there really needs to be a lot more integration between technology initiatives in companies and business outcomes.
And one of the topics that seems to be on everyone's agenda today is AI. So, as someone with oversight of AI and innovation, what are the most important questions boards should be asking right now?
Uh, that is that is actually another big question, right? Because right now in the US, AI is so hot. I think a lot of boards are like asking the wrong questions. But anyway, I think as a board member, you should ask questions to management with regards to AI, surrounding, let's just say, three key pillars. Okay. So the first pillar, I think, are questions surrounding the relevance of AI for your particular business. So these are questions like, hey, what is our AI ambitions? And that's importantly because your AI ambition will actually determine how much risk you're willing to take and how much resources and money you're going to invest. And then ask them what risk and opportunities AI present to our business strategy, to our industry. What are some of our competitors, our peers are doing to AI? um, are there some new entrants that might make our current business model obsolete that is enabled by AI? Basically, those are the questions you should ask in the first bucket. And then the second bucket is really questions surrounding your company's readiness for AI. Questions such as, is our data AI ready? The truth is, I think for most companies, actually their data is not AI ready. According to Gartner, only 4% of respondents think that their data is AI ready. About 37% said they're working on it, and about 55% said it probably will be tough to make sure that their data is AI ready. But the good news is, I don't think you have to focus on all your data because everyone has so much data. I think you only have to focus on those data that support the highest value use cases for your particular company. So ask about readiness, right? And then the last pillar, which is very important, especially from a board perspective, because I think boards of public companies focus a lot on risk. It's really about some AI guiding principle and code of conduct, for the company. Do we have an AI governance framework to make sure that our AI approaches are ethical and responsible? Do we have a cross-disciplinary team that includes not only people from technology, but also, representatives from legal, from audit, from finance, from compliance, to make sure that we approach AI from a holistic perspective? Do we risk rank our AI use cases? Do we know what is the highest risk AI use cases? Medium risk, low risk. And I think the last question is, do we have the ability to continuously monitor and audit to ensure that our AI approaches are ethical, responsible, and also comply with rules and regulations? I think those are the main three things as a board of a public company that you should ask your management.
And what excites you personally, and maybe what worries you about the pace of tech and AI innovation?
Oh, what excites me is the endless possibilities that AI will enable for companies. So when you think about it, as a society, right, we basically right now is in the midst of transitioning from, in the past was about perceptive AI. Today, a lot of people talk about generative AI. Some of the more advanced companies have kind of like moved to the next thing, which is agentic AI, where you have AI agents can do things for you. And eventually, I think you will have what I call physical AI. And so here in the United States, I split my time between San Francisco and Las Vegas. And in San Francisco, there are all these Waymo cars, like I use it all the time. These are, self-driving cars. There's no drivers. You call the car comes, pick you up. Very safe. Once you go into the car, within 2 seconds, you're going to forget you're actually in a driverless car. And so just the possibilities are endless. But of course, with that, right, there are consequences that I think we don't know yet, especially with that large scale automation. The question then will be, what will happen to the workforce? Sure, I think certain workforce will be enhanced by AI, but if we're honest with ourselves, I think certain roles probably will be replaced. And so the question is, what will society do? What will their purpose be if you have all these AIs doing things for you? And so I think those are some of the big, I guess, more societal questions. I mean, it's not really a board question, but more like a societal questions. Like if you have all these self-driving cars all over the place, then what happens to the Uber drivers, right? What happened to drivers? You have to think about that.
It's high on the agenda at the moment in Indonesia. So metrics like the Purchasing Manager Index is at an all-time high, but still are layoffs in the sector. The reason they've been able to achieve that all-time high is because of the introduction of automation. But what it's meant is that what used to be a four-person job is now a one-person job. And I think
Yes,
countries or states in the US even where the labor force is what I describe as low value, labor intensive. You know, uh, that is a segment of society that's really at risk. As soon as you remove those casual jobs, driving Uber, riding Gojek into Carter, manufacturing is a huge one. I mean, what's the fallout, right? That's the question that we're waiting with bated breath for time to indicate. um,
totally. And if we can even look at it, I think this is the first time that white collar jobs will be disrupted, right? Because a lot of these AIs can code. Actually, they code pretty well. And so if you're a software engineer, you'll be like, well, it like some of my role will be eliminated because the AI can code. Or if you're a low level accountant, for instance, the AI can also do accounting work. And so I feel like this is the first time as a society in the past, I think automation during industrial revolution, automation might replace some blue collar labor. But today, I think AI might replace some white collar work. And so the question is, what should they do? Like, what should our children study in school if, they can no longer be software engineers?
So true. So true. So the reason we started this podcast, Sunita, was that I wanted to use my platform, my reach that I have on LinkedIn and social media to bridge a gap. The gap that I wanted to bridge is that there's many young aspirational people who are ambitious, who are hardworking, but maybe don't have access to mentorship, to guidance. Now, they know they want to become someone and be something, but they don't really know how to go about it. So I'd like to ask you a question where if you could go back and sit next to your 25-year-old self, what would you say to her?
Oh man, so many things, Lee. But you know what? I think this can actually be summarized based on a recent video that I just watched a few months ago. So there is this video that this venture capitalist gave. His name is Graham Weaver. And the video was basically his last lecture to the Stanford MBA students. And the title of his lecture was about how to lead an asymmetric life. And basically, what that means is, to have an asymmetric outcome, basically, you put in input. However, there are certain things, that you need to do in order to have the chance on the other side to have an outcome that is asymmetric. So, the first thing which I wish I had learned earlier in my career was to be comfortable with being uncomfortable, to do the hard things as early as possible in your career. And I think this is very counterintuitive, right? Because I think for most people, they're risk averse, they don't want to be uncomfortable, they kind of go the most comfortable route. And actually, it has been proven, in many different situations that that's not a good thing. You actually have to be uncomfortable as early as possible because that will build a superpower. And that has been proven even with athletes, like, how every athlete works really hard, right? Everyone wakes up early, they train for hours, everyone does that. But the difference between the great one and the average athlete is good, okay? Don't get me wrong. I guess there's like that kind of like zone where you push yourself a little bit harder, and then you got to like a zone where the oxygen's a little bit thinner. But once you push, sure, it's uncomfortable, but you push yourself to be there. And then all of a sudden you're operating at a much higher level that is much thinner oxygen level, I guess, like in the case of athletes. And then that's your superpower because no one else dares to go to that place. And Lee, I shared this with you because I think when I was young, I was so scared of everything. I was so scared of being uncomfortable. And I wish I had known this when I was younger. And then the second thing is about doing your thing. And I think for a lot of young people, it's kind of hard to know what is your thing, right? But after a while, you're going to know what you're good at. Um, a lot of people, I think, go into careers because they don't know, like they just don't know what they're good at, which there's nothing wrong with that. Or sometimes they go into things because they think that's what's expected of them, what society expects of them. Or let's say if you're in an MBA school, every year there are things that are hot that everyone wants to go into. So you go into there. But I think over time, if it's not your thing, you're not gonna be good at it. And if anything, those people who is in that thing that you're not good at, but it is their thing, you will never beat them. You know what I mean? So you'll be average, and this person that they're doing their thing, and it could be something that is so unglamorous or like something that is so, like something that is like so mundane. But that other person is so much better than you. Like you'll be average, the other person will be like excellent. So do your thing, right? Not other people's thing. And then the last thing, and we all know this, but it's just hard to do it for a long time. You have to do it for decades. I don't think there is like shortcuts, like Warren Buffett. I started investing in Berkshire Hathaway 30 years ago, to be honest with you. And, Warren Buffett's all about compound interest, value investing. He doesn't invest in growth stocks, only in value stock. But man, those compounds over 30 years, um, it really matters. And so I think, you know, you have to do it consistently, your thing, for a very long time.
And one last question, Sunita. What advice do you have for young professionals, especially women, who want to climb the tech leadership ladder?
Yeah, I think that is another good question. I think the first thing is just understanding that life is a journey, right? You know, it's a journey, it's a marathon, it's long, it's winding, you know what I mean? So you should really enjoy the journey. That's the most important thing. But there are, I think, a few guiding principles that I felt have helped me. The first is about having a growth mindset and to embrace change, because at least from my experience, I feel like the only thing that's constant in life is really change. Oops, I don't know. Lee, are you still there?
I'm here, Celia. Can you hear me?
Perfect. Because my screen just accidentally blanked. But anyway, so if you still can't hear me, I'll just keep talking. Yeah, so have a growth mindset, embrace change, because the only thing that's constant in life is change. And so you sometimes have to disrupt yourself before you're being disrupted by others. I think the second, just don't be afraid to make mistakes. I think being perfect is overrated. You know, if anything, I think a lot of successful people that I know, they have made so many mistakes, but you know, they learn from it, reflect, and quickly pivot. I think that really builds character. And then the last thing, and I learned about this over time as well. I think, you know, as much as possible, don't just focus on kind of what you like, because that is usually fleeting. I think really try to find that intersection of your passion, which is what you like, and in my case is technology and innovation, but kind of combine that with your skills, you know, like you will be good at something, and eventually like your purpose. You know, I think if you can find that intersection of passion, skills, and purpose, I think it will keep you in the game for a long time.
The conversation. Sunita's journey reminds us that success isn't linear, it's layered, intentional, and often hard won. From launching innovative businesses to shaping national conversations about board culture and AI, Sunita is living proof that you can lead with both wisdom and values. If you're inspired to explore your own path into innovation, impact, or board leadership, or simply want to lead a little bit more boldly, take a page from Sunita's story. Stay curious, build across boundaries, and never underestimate the power of showing up with purpose. You can learn more about Sunita's work at sunitalontoh.com and follow her on LinkedIn for ongoing insights. If this episode resonated with you, please share it with a friend, leave us a review, or hit subscribe. We've got more candid career stories coming your way. Thanks for listening to Career Candour. Until next time, keep showing up for the career you want.